what you're about to see is a free sample of the One Flesh Marriage workshop that Steph and I ran this past fall. We're doing a new version of it starting on January the 8th because people really, really like the live interaction and being able to be in the Q&A. This first course out of the 9-course class is on the marital island, and people absolutely love this lesson, so we're releasing it widely and publicly. It's the One Flesh class, and it's the Leave and Cleave book. That is the textbook, 9 chapters, 9 lessons. If you buy this class on timothyjgordon.com, just go there, hit classes, you get a free Leave and Cleave book, and you get enrolled for the January the 8th first class out of 9 weekly classes. There's no other marriage prep or marriage remediation Catholic class out there like it. Fully anti-feminist, and it's fully specific, and people all, about 150 of them in this first session, were absolutely pleased. If you can't make the January the 8th class, by the way, and you can't do the live classes, recordings are also available of this fall course, and it's a little cheaper that way. You don't get to ask live questions. You don't get to interact with the other couples, so people don't like it as much, but that's a second option. A third option, if you need marriage remediation, is what we call our intensive marriage coaching. It's 2-on-2. It's me and Steph. You can register for that. Tim, Steph, you and your spouse online at timothyjgordon.com. That's a different product, but it's all in the same vein. We're trying to tool up Catholic marriage. This free sample, which you're about to behold without further ado, is absolutely a fun class. It was fun to teach, and people all said it was both informative and amazing to behold and to be a student for. So consider being one of the live students starting again on January the 8th. Enjoy.
Welcome all to the One Flesh Marital workshop class. The textbook for the class, this is hardback version, is Leave and Cleave. Today's the pub date on it, and this is the first session of the class. As Steph was telling people who arrived early, don't worry if you don't have your copy of the book yet. Many don't, because over half the people by our count ordered the signed version. They have to come to us first. And if you need it, even though I tend to, as a teacher, I lecture first, then have you read, it's proven to be much more profitable that way, epistemologically, psychologically. University professors do it in the opposite order. And that, to me, that never made sense. You read first, then you come into lecture. I do it the opposite way anyway, so you don't even need to read until next week. But if you want to, we'll send you a PDF. Just email us and we'll send out a master list of PDFs. Please just, don't share them with people. But if you're waiting for your copy in the mail, whether it's signed or unsigned, we'll get you the PDF in the mail. So the purpose of this course is, in a word, as we've said in some of the endorsements for the class, it's now that the world is waking up to find itself feminist, and the world is reestablishing, at least within Christendom, the need for patriarchy. Almost no one knows how to do it. And we reduced this, thanks to our friend Jordan, who said this was a dope show that we did in the past, almost 4 years ago. Really be specific. The devil's in the details. We reduced it to 9 lessons.
So every time Tim does a live class, I like to accompany it with the slides. If you'd like a copy of the slides for this lesson, go ahead and email us. I'm happy to give that to you as well. And we do have the chat feature and everything. Communicate with us in the...
So it's being shared. That's on the screen. Okay, cool.
A few words about how our workshop is structured. Let me know if you're having a hard time hearing me. I can just move this over. So we really did design this for anyone who is married or is being called to the married vocation. A lot of you here are single or maybe in early relationships or engaged, and you're all very welcome here. Our book, Leave and Cleave, of course, is geared towards people that are already married, but a lot of the information in that is it's good to have a, I guess, a precursor or something that you're looking forward to or you're learning about before you actually get married. So you are all welcome here. It mirrors the new book, Leave and Cleave, which we actually have we just got this hard copy of the sample today. So book pages, if you look at the bottom, those of you who have the book is not required for the course, but those of you who have the book, the pages that we discuss will be on the bottom there for just easy reference. So each class will be recorded and placed on our class playlist. A lot of people who are watching this right now aren't actually here live. They're actually just watching the recording, so they're welcome as well. But if you want to review a class, then you have your class playlist. You can go ahead and rewatch the recordings if you need to miss a live class. You do not have to appear on camera. That's one question we get a lot from people. If you wish to just completely remain anonymous and just listen in, then feel free to do that. On Zoom, there's a feature for you to go ahead and turn off your camera and your microphone. So we will begin each class with a lecture on the week's chapter. It'll be 9 classes. And then we'll end with a live Q&A. The live Q&A, please feel free to jump in with anything that you want to discuss on this chapter if you just have something on your mind in general. So how Tim likes to do these live classes is and this is actually how you ran your classroom for many, many years, is that he likes to lecture first and then people go and they read the chapter if you have the book afterwards. It just helps people to get that in the synapses. Okay, so I will make a note that some of the other classes that we did do, a lot of people suggested or had said when I did the Ask Your Husband class that the Q&As were particularly helpful. So most people are actually interested in our discussion at that segment of the class. So those will be recorded. So if you want to appear on camera, go ahead and unmute yourself and appear. If you want to remain anonymous, go ahead and just write so in the chat and we'll just read the questions aloud. And again, if you have any questions, please do email us at timothyjgordon@timothyjgordon.com and we will get right back to you. All right, let's begin. All right, maybe I'll do this slide here. So these are just some pictures of us. We've been married nearly 20 years. So this is just a little bit about us. Tim and Steph are heralds of patriarchy and authors favoring its fundamental inherence within Christianity, having written Case for Patriarchy, which is what Tim did for the guys. And me, I wrote Ask Your Husband for the ladies. Tim has 8 years experience teaching high school theology, literature, and mathematics, and 2 years experience teaching philosophy. You want to read this one, honey? Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Take a drink.
Yeah, so if you count 2 years college, 8 years high school, even though part of that was concurrent, that's 10 years, if that matters to you. As for the applied teachings of this course, remember, this is practical intellect, not speculative intellect. This is how to take the now realizable needfulness of patriarchy and apply it in your lives. So it's probably a more thorough lesson, honestly, for people who aren't yet married. When you're already married, we're assuming, like I just did this interview with Father Ripperger an hour and a half ago, pretty much assuming 99 out of 100 Catholic couples we meet have not been doing it patriarchally. Mm-hmm. And so once again, the devil's in the details. It's applied part of your intellect, applied part of your soul, where we're not going to take an overly intellectual approach to this. We already demonstrated it, even magisterially, if that counts as an intellectual approach, in our other 2 books. So this goes hand in glove with that. We're really just talking about in these 9 aspects of marriage, how to start doing it. You probably don't have as fresh a start if you're already married, because the subtitle of this book means very specifically 9 marriage prep secrets that were once taught that are now censored. Almost no one has been applying these, and that's why it's so needful, and that's why we had on Father Chad today and all that. But in an applied way, where credentials don't matter, and I don't like to tout credentials anyway, because it's usually kind of embarrassing for the speaker and for the listener. I don't do it with letters after my name typically at all. Once I get the doctorate, you're not going to have to call me Dr. Timothy Gordon.
The kids will have to call you that.
Yeah, yeah. I'll make you call me that every time. No, I mean, it's just kind of silly. But in the easy, colloquial, avuncular, informal sense, anyway, our credentials are. We're in the 20th year of marriage. We are genuinely just like each other a lot. It's too corny to say madly in love. I can't believe we wrote that. But seems fake and gay, but we really like each other a lot. And it takes some finesse, and it takes these 9 lessons to pull that off after 20 years. I know there are people that are in here that have been married 30 and 40 years, and we seem like spring chickens. But if you can do it for 20 years, you can do it for 40. And this course is the methodology that Christianity once burnished, held close, and actually taught in these marital classes. And now it basically censors. And the key to it all is understanding the false gospel of mutual submission. And so that's more part of Case for Patriarchy doctrinally, but we do touch on it here as well. So that's good.
And I'll say too, a word before we begin the class. To have a really good marriage, you have to have enough humility to want to change things that you're bad at. And I think that that's where everyone in this course, and I know that's for how I view it in our marriage as well. Like, that's where you have to start. Like, everybody has things that we do wrong and we need to do better. And once we get rid of the pride of that issue, then you really can just
Ready to go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Ready to
go.
Rock all 4 cylinders.
That's it. All right, chapter 1, be your own marital island.
Let me give, we started out the Case for Patriarchy with a thought experiment, like saying husbands who ask the boss, who, according to them, who is their wife. It's incredibly gender dysphoric. I talked about this some with Father Chad today. I like to start with another thought experiment just to pique the mind to get you going here. So it's a similar thought experiment headed in a concomitant direction. Think of this. When you were younger, lived more in the world, assuming that most of you are reverts or converts to the faith rather than cradle Catholics who are strong through the 90s and 2000s, just because I'm playing the numbers. There is something, it makes its way into The Office. There's an episode where they play Desert Island. You know, people will say as a thought experiment, what's your celebrity crush? This is incredibly fake and gay. What's your favorite, who's your favorite celebrity crush that you would want to go to a desert island with? Men would say this when they're bored in the cubicles at their 9-to-5 job. And it's not considered weird according to worldly wisdom, which is a contradiction in worldly wisdom. It's not considered odd in the first place. Most people will have a ready-made answer. Most secular guys, most guys that low-key hate their wives and their wives low-key hate them, which is a staggeringly high number out there. And, they're just like, well, this is my sexiest crush, blah, 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 whatever her name is. And, I have this answer ready-made, and we'll live on the island together. We'll make things work. We'll have a little Swiss Family Robinson, like homemade water-driven, hydro-powered windmills, and we'll, Swiss Family Robinson, and I'll have this beautiful wife, and we'll have like 25 kids, and we'll just make it work together, me and whoever it is, Angelina Jolie or whatever. And you're like, okay, so you want to live on a desert island with some beautiful woman? They're like, yeah. They're like, okay. So it turns out you're actually a lame suburban married guy, and you actually have a wife that you were at least once attracted to. We're going to be real brutally honest in this course. Why do you have this other woman who you're never going to meet, and you're already married, wouldn't look at you, you shouldn't be looking at her? Why do you have anyone but your wife? Well, they don't have an answer. So if you're a guy that's madly in love with your wife, to use the corny expression, Hallmark expression, no guys will believe you if you say, well, the beautiful woman that I'd like to retire to a desert island with is my wife, the woman sitting next to me. And they'll say, yeah, right. Well, why is this so far-fetched? That's the whole premise in chapter 1, which is called Be Your Own Marital Island. Why is this far-fetched at all? Okay, you don't, as a guy, there are differences between guys and girls in terms of attractors, but as a guy, you don't marry someone that you're not physically attracted to. So I think this woman here is beautiful. We're not going to do a whole bunch of white knight simping. This is not all about building up women or anything like that. That's obviously not what we're doing. But this does happen to be my favorite person in the world. And when you're in love with someone, it's like, this is a reality. Now, it's not a reality that we actually live on an island or anything like that. That's if we make a few more bucks than we currently have. But we call chapter 1 and this first lesson, Be Your Own Marital Island, precisely because it's a fantasy. It's a sexy fantasy that can be a reality. God is good. The marital vocation is, and again, this isn't like a Tony Robbins feel great about yourself speech or anything, but it is kind of feel great about the institution of marriage. Priests have a hard life. It's the holier and the higher vocation. We can still get to heaven, though, with the lower vocation, where you don't have to be celibate, and you get to live out that fantasy of living with someone that is responsible for bearing your children as a man. Well, I don't know. Did you have anything to say that? I'd like to read a paragraph.
We started this the entire course with Be Your Own Marital Island because this is your foundation. For us, having been married 20 years now, we constantly, no matter what's going on in our lives, have to go back to this chapter, that it's the two of you, that you're in it for the long haul. There's no divorce. You have to work things out, and you have to make your marital life as fun and as interesting and full of love as you possibly can do. And that requires each person taking responsibility and being an adult about where your shortcomings are.
Yeah, the quote I was looking for is up on the screen. After all, who wouldn't love the idea of an island comprised of family sovereignty? That's chapter 1, where it's really just you. Licit sex, you get to have sex. Priests don't get to have sex. They have to be celibate for life. Everyone thinks that's horrible. It would be rough. Wholesome and communal fun and labor together. That's chapter 3. Rightly ordered and attractive sex roles. So we're rightly ordering nature qua our families. Prayerful Christian kingliness and queenliness. You know, you treat your wife like a queen. Again, this is not a white knight session. She treats you like a king. You treat her like a queen. And the more she does it, the more you want to do it. Gratefulness and loyalty, de minimis spousal arguments. That's going to be a big part. Chapter 7, talking about arguing. That's a real good one. Self-empowered child rearing, and mutual prioritization by and of each spouse for the other. This sounds amazing. Sounds like, again, a sexy fantasy. It's one that you can actually have. And yet most men will actually laugh at you for this. And this is an absurd thing. So the proper response to the thought experiment is, yeah, I'd like to have that. And a weird response is, yeah, but that's not really realistic. It's utterly realistic.
Oh, it's 100%. And it turns out, like we have on our next slide here, that following scripture and doing what God tells us to do is actually what's best for us. So we talk a lot about, you know, we talked about this on a show recently where we hear some certain verses in scriptural passages where we get used to hearing them, leave and cleave and you're one flesh, but really try to think about what those words specifically mean. And particularly with leave and cleave, we have Genesis 2:24. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. When we were initially talking about this, some people had the wrong impression of what it means. Some people think, oh, it meant to sever. No, it doesn't. It actually is, I think I have it down here.
Like a butcher.
It is like a butcher, got to cleave things. No, it means actually to adhere quite strongly like a glue to one another. That's entirely fitting with the order of the Christian household. So leaving home and cleaving to one spouse is, as a human precept, well ordered for both men and women. This is the main idea when it comes to being your own marital island. You are leaving home and you are cleaving to your spouse. They are your entire world now.
Yeah, and a sidebar there. Again, this is behind the scenes or whatever. We paired the title for the book as the textbook with the class without even being fully mindful. Maybe I knew it somewhere in my background cognitive schema or something, deep-seated memory, without fully realizing that both of these come from either side of the semicolon in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. That literally leaving and cleaving, the name of the book, is the left side of the semicolon, and the right side of the semicolon is the one flesh thing. Yeah, but I mean, you're going to go make another point, but it's really important to say one flesh is a very sexy image. I promise I'm not going to keep talking like this, but it is the physical, anatomical, physiognomic reminder that this is a sui generis relationship, marriage. You're not that close with anybody. You're not ordered by nature to be that close to anyone in your family of origin, your parents. You kind of left that life behind. Doesn't mean you can't talk to them, but you've left that life behind. And even your kids, I was talking to Father Chad about this for my locals behind the paywall supporters. Even your kids, yeah, they come from that one flesh union, but they're not part of the one flesh union with you. They will go out and form their own. There is one person that you're forming a one flesh union with, and yes, it's very, very sexy, but it's actually, that's why the marital act is the conjugal act. It's because that's the time when it's undeniable that you are now, I don't want to do bad Trinitarian theology, but it's like you're one person. You're not, you're still two persons, but you're one flesh. So it's like you've come together, like Rocky and Adrian. So we're intended by God in nature to thrive morally and spiritually separate from our parents, but completely dependent on our spouses, man on woman and woman on man. We'll talk about the different ways in chapters 4 and 5 that it's sexier for a woman to depend on a man. It's weird if she's clingy in the wrong ways. It's very unsexy if a man is clingy in the wrong ways. But if they're clingy in the right ways, this is what we call,
that's what makes it work,
complementarian. That's very sexy. Yeah.
And throughout the course, we're going to have a lot of these hard truths where it's going to really challenge you, maybe some things that you've thought before in the past. But this is what we've found even in our own lives and through counseling many, many, many couples, through a lot of the issues that we're seeing now in just Catholic communities in general. And the hard truth we have on this slide is that the leaving and the cleaving, actually, we've noticed that a lot of couples do this very poorly. They either overly involve their families and they don't fully cleave to one another. And that just causes a slew of issues. So on here, we have Archbishop Fulton Sheen wrote a book on this very topic entitled 3 to Get Married, which is predicated on the Christian triad of man, woman, God for a marriage. Noteworthily, it's not called 7+ to get married, inclusive of both pairs of parents-in-law, addition to likely step-parents, grandparents, and any pets. Being your own marital island means that it's you too. Obviously, you have your surrounding cast of well-wishers and families. That's a beautiful, wonderful thing. We're not discouraging that at all. But at the end of the day, it's leave and cleave, and it's you two together, really against the world.
The subtitle of the book implies that what we're teaching you is like contraband. It's valuable contraband, like peanut butter in the Soviet Union or something. So one thing we were really mindful of to have integrity and to demonstrate good faith to the subtitle of the book is to, at the end or toward the end of each chapter, each lesson of these 9 chapters and lessons, to tell you in what sense this lesson is censored. And that means that things are going to get very politically incorrect each of these 9 classes, each of these 9 chapters. So I'll begin by saying, and we'll return to it at the end of tonight's class, but what's censored and therefore politically incorrect that the church used to teach but is no longer taught because now it's, feminist heyday, is your families of origin are getting in the way of marriage. And here, that's not quite feminist, though it's got this attenuated connection to feminism that's not all that important to spell out. And even children are getting in the way of really leaving and cleaving. But it means you're fully independent. And a lot of trads are like, well, we're the mom and the dad of the bride and the groom, or the groom. Hopefully not of the bride and the groom. You've got bigger issues. But
that would not be a valid marriage.
And so we want to still have our opinions count. Yeah, that sounds like a traditional thing to say, but it's really not. Your opinion was rendered unto your son or daughter, hopefully timely. That means before they get married. The politically incorrect thing that's sort of hated on both sides of the aisle, left and right, is that time's kind of gone.
You had till 18 years or whenever your child got married to pepper them with your advice, unless they ask you for it when they're an adult. But when they're married, then there's a new king in town, and that's the husband. And good kings mind their own territories.
Yeah, good kings tend their borders and know where, okay, they know exactly the lay of the land. Here's where my domain ends, and this is where King Philip's domain begins. And I'm not going to mess with that. So your father, married men, Your father's area is his wife and his kids when they're minors. Your domain that's sovereign is now your wife, and it begins on the day. It begins on the day you get married, but even before that, we can talk about this later, where it actually picks up. But the point is, this is the first lesson that starts making people angry, even good, non-left Catholics, faithful, trad, conservative Catholics, whatever you want to call it. You can't get around it. And so this is where we're going to be true to the subtitle of the book in each lesson, not to be, what do they say? What they always call like Miley and provocative for its own sake. But these will, we're not being provocateurs here, but these are self-evidently provocative things, each of the 9 lessons. The first one is that leave and cleave as a concept is 100% indispensable to marital well-being. And the hard truth inherent in this part of the lesson is that most Christian married couples today, I'd say 9 out of 10, Father Chad agreed with me, depend far too much upon their parents, who themselves, in most cases, I'm not saying you're not the exception to the rule, but because most of us here are the offspring of baby boomers, or if you're a little younger, Gen X, maybe we have some baby boomers who are the offspring of greatest gen. It doesn't matter. All 3 of those generations, greatest gen, baby boomers, and Gen X, all by and large, 98% of them did a very, very poor job wifing and husbanding and parenting, and knew nothing and taught nothing about how Christian marriage actually thrives. I mean, most of them are egalitarians. So there's a little like etymology on cleave, why it means cling, not chop.
Yeah, some people thought, cleave doesn't mean stick to, it means to separate. No, it's from the Hebrew word to back. I'm saying that right. It means to cling, stick, or stay close. So etymology of that one.
Yeah, but I mean, back to ragging on the generations which gave us experientially bad anti-wisdom about marriage. Most advice that they would give from these 3 generations would be materialistic, anti-gospel, anti-marriage, anti-life falsities, such as don't get married until you're 30. I think I know where this is in the book.
Don't get married until you have your own nest egg. Career first. Get a fallback plan, which just means divorce, by the way. What happens if you get divorced? You need a fallback plan. That's usually said to the girls. Find yourself at university, which honestly, obviously just means have lots of premarital sex and party. Travel abundantly after university, which also means has a lot of premarital sex and party. Once married at 30, wait several years before childbearing. You know what causes that? We get this all the time. When we walk out, we have 7 children. When we go to the Cracker Barrel, which we frequent from time to time, you know what causes that? When our kids walk by, every time we go out, it's somebody. There's always that guy that has to say that to us.
Which means contracept.
Means contracept. In reference to any couple bearing more than 2 children, the worst one that we hate more than anything is happy wife, happy life.
Means feminism wins and Christianity has lost.
Oh, these are tied actually for worse. My wife, go ask my wife, the boss.
Also means feminism won and Christianity lost.
Maintain separate interests and even vacations within marriage. We've heard a lot from the older gen.
Which presupposes you're going to get a divorce and you can't really possibly like each other after marriage, which is, we'll talk about that in a bit.
Everyone deserves to be happy.
Which comes from the deep, deep, deep indoctrination. One of my favorite movies when I was little, I could recite like every line in it. Deep pro-divorce indoctrination, which was really happening in the middle 90s, highest divorce rates of all time in human history, from Mrs. Doubtfire.
Which glorifies divorce, that movie.
Yeah. It can be as much a blessing as a marriage. Miranda Hill.
Yeah, everybody's happier after divorce, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Nonsense. Absolute nonsense.
Yeah. So the point is, all of these platitudes that are, we'll just say that they're boomer platitudes, have a sort of common goal, have a common aim, a telos, if you will. Clearly here, the logical progression from the first of these falsities we just read to the last of them should be self-evident. Think about this. I'll make the connection for each step here. If a well-advised youth should wait to get married, it signifies that holy matrimony is a drag that should be postponed. If it's a drag, then one should enter into it only with a fallback plan, that is a nest egg. This requires both men and women to have careers prior to marriage. This requires feminism. This requires minimum childbearing within marriage, 1.8 children per household, or whatever the pathetic WASPs out in American suburbs do. I heard someone say this on Twitter. Listen, I'm so sick of this country. This diminishes the natural role of married women and masculinizes them. This causes husbands to dislike their wives and vice versa. This leads spouses to minimize time around one another and to build social circles independent of one another.
Have like time apart. Oh, I need a break from my spouse. You should not be needing a break from your spouse. That means you have to deal with the issues that are dividing you in your marriage. You should want to spend all your free time with one another. If you do not feel that way, then you have a problem you need to identify and fix.
Right. And it's natural to need a little bit of time away from the kids so you can tend to the romance and sexy time and all that. It's not natural to need break by yourself away from your spouse. So that could have been one of those tells. We have like 5 or 6 tells at the beginning of this book. You need it if that's gone. You're one flesh now. This last thing that you need to build social circles independent of one another signifies and eventuates in unprecedentedly high divorce rates. Alas, this is a fait accompli. This is completely recognizable, cognizable as what's going on around us. So this is the water we're all swimming in. And so we understand there's a lot of marital strife out there. And that's why a course like this is necessary. And that's why saying the simple truth from marriage manuals of, the late 1800s, very early 1900s, not even middle 1900s. Things are already feminist by the 1940s and 50s. But 100 years ago, what was common wisdom then and was just what the church had always been teaching is now literally going to be received by maybe even some of you as provocateurism. Well, it's not. So we're just trying to tell you the truth. And that's why you paid value for this course.
And again, I'll reiterate, I've said this before on Tim's podcast, but many of you who might be new to us might not know, I am a convert to the Catholic faith, and I did not have religion at all before I married Tim. So a lot of this was new to me. I come from a household that there's divorce in my parents, with my parents. So the concept of Catholicism and patriarchy and how a household should run, I had no concept at all. So I'm very sympathetic to anybody who's kind of like, oh, this seems a little bit different from what I'm expecting. But the great thing about the Catholic faith is that we have texts from a long time ago when things ran just so much better. And Father Kelly was one of those who had I think it was a marriage manual. And we have a lot of his quotes and things that he taught about in a more traditional way.
Yeah, and Father Kelly's going to be recurred to a lot. Ed Fazer said when he came out with that massively important work, defending the death penalty, that ended up influencing Francis. If you don't know, that's sort of an insider secret. Francis was actually influenced by that book. Fazer told me and Chris Plants, he was like, all I was doing was reading the moralists, the manualists of the early 20th century, and just sort of, I was citing them, but I felt like I was ripping them off because no one knew this stuff. Particularly in chapters 3, 8, we felt like we were kind of, and even with regard to the marital sex chapter, we felt like we were just ripping off Father Kelly's book, but we're citing him. So it's not. It's just been turned away from willfully by the church. Here's the thing. Decision-making, if you know anything about Thomistic action theory, is what makes you a good person or a bad person, because virtue is not an act, but a habit. In order for a married couple to perfect the process of independent decision-making, they must become independent. To become independent, they must have the independent decision-making. So it's a bit of a catch-22, which is typical of all Aristotelian virtue ethics.
So in order for a married couple to perfect the process of independent decision-making, they have to be their own, of course. And we have here on the second to last bullet point, on the rare occasion that a married couple finds itself requiring outside counsel, appropriate advisors ought to be selected according to expertise and not genetics. So what we're finding is that a lot of younger couples are feeling a little insecure about being the new couple, not really knowing how to navigate marriage. And so they're soliciting a lot of advice from just their surrounding cast members, just based off the fact, oh, this is my mom or my dad. and they're getting really, really bad advice, which actually causes more division in the marriage. So we really advise you, if you know somebody who has a really great marriage, reach out to those people if you need advice. But this really, as we say, should not be happening too often. You really need to start perfecting making decisions and mistakes as a couple and learning from them. So the hard
actually, we'll put it this way so it's really clear. We skipped the second and the third bullet point. The decisions as a couple need to be like owned. You need to have ownership of your decisions as a couple. Now, the man's going to make them, but they're the couple's decision. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So there are two problems. People are going for advice too much outside of the marital couple. You already have the man and his counselor if he needs outside advice. Help me. That's what a wife is giving them. I'm thinking of doing this. Not that the man has to. He can make the decision independently. Should be the norm. But if he needs to get an outside opinion, this is what, again, Pius XI was very clear. Women are not like children just because they have to submit. Go to your wife for advice if you need some. Men are not doing this. So that keeps it all insular. So that's still introspective to the couple. So number one problem, people are going for outside advice far too much. Number two problem, the couple, and couples who constantly seek outside advice will never habituate the virtue of self-reliance. That's number one problem. Number two problem is the source to which they turn for advice is they're like, well, I guess we have to go to our parents. Well, that's sort of like, I don't know, drinking out of the small pond you just washed your socks in a lot of cases. I mean, not to run anyone's parents down, but we're dealing with a generational crisis. We are dealing with a generational crisis. And the reason that 99% of everyone is lacking in this area is because of the generational crisis, meaning the generation above was not doing marriage and family correct. And they hadn't been taught it by the generation above them, and so forth. It's not an infinite regression. This began somewhere, but it began before even greatest generation. And we'll get to origins and etymologies and etiologies later. But the point is, well, how did you put it, Steph? Like, you should, if you're going to do the rare exception, not the rule, and go for outside advice rather than the Aristotelian thing, habituate that virtue that you're trying to gain, which is a catch-22. You're going to be like, no, on this one rare instance, we'll take the leniency, we'll take the cheat, we'll whatever, phone a friend. Do not do it based on genetics. Seek advice based on, what do you call it? Merit,
expertise, right? Merit, exactly. The hard truth on this slide is that advice mongering from sources outside of the marriage invites less obvious extrinsic problems as well, including granddaddy of marital nuisances, the heaping of unsolicited advice. So if you're in a marriage right now and you find yourselves being inundated by your families kind of peeking in and trying to micromanage, you opened that door somewhere early on and gave the message to your surrounding members that you needed help, that you needed micromanaging. You've got to close that door unless it's absolutely necessary. And again, like Tim says, if the husband is requires advice, he has one naturally in his house. That's his wife. And if there needs to, in the rare occasion, go outward, like if you need some expertise on something, then feel free to do that. But again, pick your advisors well.
Yeah. So
sometimes they get hard to get rid of once you invite them in.
Yeah. A vampire can only enter your house if you invite him. Once you invite him, he's very hard to get rid of. And we cite some psychology which states that once you put out that, you call it like the distress call. Yeah. Once you put out the distress call, there's some article. I don't typically read psychology white papers. The people that like to respond the most are people usually the great aunt, great uncle, whatever, cousin, with the most troubled marriages.
The busybodies.
The busybodies.
Respond first.
So they're going to be giving you divorcee type advice if you kind of put this out to your family. And this is another reason why you shouldn't run your spouse down. But the general rule here is that frequently soliciting advice impairs the couple's independence for some obvious reasons, namely Aristotelianism. You have to acquire new virtues by habituating them, just by doing them. A good harpist becomes a harpist by harping. And that's a little bit tough. And it's a little bit of a challenge for newlyweds in the first year or two. This should not be actually the honeymoon phase. Honeymoon's fun. But once you get back and you're doing the first year or two of marriage, this will be the hardest year of your marriage because you need to do it right.
And I would say to women, particularly wives in that situation, have patience for your husband when he's a new patriarch of the household. Encourage him and help him along with love and support, because he's new at being, I guess, the king of his own territory, so to speak.
Yeah.
And he's going to make mistakes. There's 100% he's going to make, sometimes he's going to make the wrong call, but that's really not the point. The point is that he did what he thought was best for you in that initial period of time. And you should just be there to love and support him. And things will iron out in the future. But it won't iron out in the future if you're constantly trying to get somebody else to make decisions for you, inviting other people into your marriage to make those decisions for you. The patriarch can't, I guess, stand on his own legs if somebody else is micromanaging that.
Right. Particularly like her dad, or if she's saying, go to your dad. Look at it like this. In that first year or two of marriage, or for couples that have been married 10 years, if you never tended to this, tend to it starting right now. So think of yourself as the first year newlywed. If you run into day-to-day problems, which you will, life is fraught with all kinds of problems we didn't ask for, then you're going to be tempted to cheat. The phone a friend thing, whatever that was, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or whatever, phone a friend, lifeline. You should always look at that as a last resort, and it's kind of a fail. Now, you'll get around the logistical problem if you ask the right person for the right advice. But you have a new problem that if you're doing that as the rule rather than the exception to the rule, the phoning of the friend, assuming you ask someone meritorious and not the greater problem of asking someone who's related to you but will give you bad advice, then you're building a second hole, a second problem, which is that you are not beginning to habituate self-reliance. So I get that this is once you start seeing where we're going with this, it's quite obvious. That's how a lot of these lessons are. You just probably aren't used to someone telling you in your first year or two of marriage, try to not be going to your parents or even an older brother or sister who's married much. You need to be figuring stuff out on your own. And you know, we'll get to even living in a new town. Not everyone has to do this, but it's really, really good for newlyweds to be in a brand new location. It's like immersion learning of independence, qua couple, and interdependence with respect to the interior part of the couple.
Because if you see what we're trying to do here is that you want to, for the remainder of your lives together, you have that support system in your house with you wherever you go. And the stronger you make that initially, the better off you'll be at 25 years of marriage, 30 years of marriage, when people start getting sick, or like in our case, even when we were 3 years into marriage and our daughter was born with severe brain trauma. You need to establish that bond through leave and cleave and depend on each other in a way that will be dependable for the rest of your lives. And setting that foundation at the beginning and solely depending on one another is vital.
Yeah, think about it like, I don't know, if you're going through something basic, you're trying to memorize Latin declensions and you're like, okay, I think I got this. I'm kind of stuck reciting the third declension. And then someone's like, well, I can tell you. You're like, no, shut up. Don't tell me. I know you could tell me. I want to figure it. I want to actually learn this myself. Or it's like that scene in Good Will Hunting when he's just offering to do her OChem for her. Mm-hmm. And she's like, no, I know you know it. I have to learn it. So that's what you're telling your elders in your family. And that's assuming something I'm not really willing even to believe, that they know the answers, because we live in this unique time when the elders don't actually, in most cases, know how to do marriage and family.
We could go to the church documents and do a deep dive into church literature to even find some of these answers ourselves. Yeah. So patriarchy as the last but not least reason for self-reliance. So we'll get through this slide here quickly. A husband must preserve the freedom to exert his prudential authority over his household as its leader. That's fundamental. Correspondingly, a wife must learn to depend solely on her husband for her protection and well-being. She can't do that if there's a second in command, her dad, his dad, somebody else. She needs to learn to cleave to her husband by his prudential decision
Which
making.
is the favorite counterpoint of the Catholic feminists out there. And we know because we got all the shrapnel in our face and our front sides writing Case for Patriarchy and Ask Your Husband. They say, well, what if my husband's a goofball? It's like, no, I'm not saying there aren't a bunch of goofballs out there trying to be patriarchs. That's what we see every day. We get emails from these every day. So they're like, well, what do we do then? I'm like, you have to start at the beginning, a very good place to start. And you have to not ask for advice from any of your parents. They probably don't know anyway. It's the exception to the rule when the parents even know. But you have to start at the beginning, and you have to literally, like Steph termed it here, learn to depend solely on your husband. And your husband has to learn to depend solely on himself in decision-making, which he's probably not doing. That's why you're calling him a goof, feminist lady. And at most, if he needs outside advice, he can come to you for kind of does my math seem right here for ratification? And ironically, this is kind of something that vindicates the dignity of the wifely vocation here. They like being asked. He doesn't have to do it all the time, but if he wants some ratification, he wants to feel heard or seen, go to the wife and be like, yeah, I think your math checks out there. That's why you're a two team here, double team.
Do you want to talk about this this bullet point here?
Manner in which the Christian couple informs their family members of their decisions, preferences, or choices proves a vital part of the patriarchal process. So what this is Steph's coinage here. Absolutely vital. Absolutely vital. It's not just that you make your own decisions and everyone in your family is like, wow, they're really an independent couple right after you get married. You're going to have the conversation, again, because of the toxic era in which we live, where you're like, you might have noticed we've kind of hand-waved you guys away and said, we don't really want advice. Sorry. Don't take it too personally. We don't really want advice for two reasons. One, because we're learning to do it ourselves. Two, because most parents out there don't know and will give you anti-advice. But so it's important to sort of declare it in a way. Look, it's not personal. It's business. We want to be the best couple we can be, and we're learning to do our OChem on our own. And you don't have to say the part that's probably relevant for most people, which is most of your parents probably don't know anyway. But again, sending the distress calls from your island means that once those patrollers at sea get to you, they'll be intent on rescuing you off your island, particularly with the ladies out there. You're going to have a divorced uncle that's not white knighting in like the pickup artist sense, but white knighting in the sense guys love being, oh, your husband's a jerk, you should get a divorce. You'll start getting that really early, even if it's not get a divorce. It's just,
especially if you're living in a traditional lifestyle like we are, you're trying to live biblically and according to scripture, you will get that immediately. Once people start realizing, oh wait, the husband's the head of the household, what is going on here? That sounds like abuse to me. Like, you're going to start getting that real fast. So again, be very, very wary to send distress calls from your island.
The hard truth is here that the husband's final word is not up for negotiation, even from his own wife. Now, here's the thing. I've said in live streams, this is like a war council, peace council, war consigliere, peace consigliere. Like, a king has two people sitting at his right and his left when things are getting hot geopolitically. He has a war council and a peace council. You go, make me the best case for going to war. Okay, shut up. I got enough. You make me the best case for not going to war. Okay, I have enough. I'm going to make my decision as king. And it was well understood in the king's court that neither counselor is going to get haughty if his advice is opted against. Like, of course, then, off with their head or whatever. You do the best job making a case as a wife in your both war and peace council. If your counsel is sought, you do the best job you can. Here's what I think. But then you put it up. Patriarchy means his decision is final. I'll support my husband, says the goodly wife, even if he does the diametric opposite of what you just advised. That's tough, right? That's got to be tough.
That's absolutely critical. I'm going to talk to the women on that. Yes, that was initially very difficult for me to understand. We were never really there's some people that are great in Tim's life that we could get marital advice from, but we knew kind of to work things out ourselves. But one thing that was difficult for me initially to understand was that even if I'm offering him advice and he didn't take it, if he went and then failed, or there's something that turned out maybe he wasn't expecting, not to have this air of, lack of better phrase, superiority, like, oh, I knew better, I advised him differently. That's a very sour attitude. The attitude that you need to be focused on as a woman when your husband makes a decision with your family and with yourself is be like, I'm behind him. I'm behind this decision, and you don't need to rub his nose in it or make him feel stupid or anything of the sort, especially the first couple years in marriage when he's still learning to be the patriarch of the household, but especially not ever in front of your family, or I would say even privately. You should never have that sort of attitude. Obviously advice and counsel, oh, we could do maybe this a little bit differently next time is different, but attitude is key.
Attitude is everything. We're really gonna get to this in chapters 2 and 3. Attitude is everything. And again, I understand that it's a hard thing to habituate, particularly in this feminist era. Hey, what's your opinion? Okay, I'm going to do the exact opposite. A good husband is not doing that to thumb his nose at his wife. It's just like, hey, I actually respect your opinion. You're my one real consigliere, and I want to, and I'm not going to come to you for other things, but if I'm close to 50-50, a 45-55 decision is a close one. And I'm going to come to you in one case, but sometimes you might make the case for A, I go A prime. That's because I saw something as you articulated it. I'm going to go the other way. Don't take it personal.
And a good wife is marked by nobody really knows what her advice was. She just supports her husband. She might have said, contrary, but when you're talking to the family, hey, we're going to move to Detroit, you don't really know if the wife was yay or nay on that. You're just presenting it like, this is what he decided, and this is what we're doing.
That's and that's also really important to the last kind of point we're going to make tonight. Yeah, people won't even be able to tell where a husband and wife might have once disagreed. Like we've disagreed on issues before. We really have. People will never know. People will never know because it's like, yeah, my job is to support this guy here. Heavy's the head that wears the crown. So he'll have to pay. He'll have to answer to Jesus if it is a wrong decision. So I'll just support him through it, even if I was right and he was wrong. No thumbing my nose at my husband.
So one of the main things about being on your own marital island and being solely dependent on one another is that spouses must be each other's top cheerleaders, confidants, and supporters. So depending solely on each other without getting lonely on your island means that you will constantly have to be your spouse's number one in basically everything. A wife should be her husband's number one cheerleader in the sense that her natural affection for him gets expressed in the following way. She eagerly anticipates and prepares for his every potential victory before it occurs. She treats every actual small victory of his as a large victory. She celebrates his earned big wins as if he singularly planned, launched, and landed on the moon himself. Restated briefly, a wifely cheerleader is one who roots for and celebrates victory in its wake. In the pursuit of victory, she also acts as secretary, executive assistant, and producer for all of her husband's goals.
And inspirer, right? And inspire with just her beauty and, hey, you're doing a great job. And the husband's just like, thanks for the soft words. Plus, you look beautiful. Thank you for saying that. That refreshed me right now. No, I'm not joking. This is nature.
The earlier version of this slideshow got saved, but I had a bit more here on the husband side because you had some really great things to add on that. I don't know if you read what.
Yeah, I mean, like obviously, you could guess what our attitude is toward male cheerleaders, but we do talk in the chapter about how there's a kind of corresponding set of duties for the husband. Cheerleader, supporter, confidant are three naturally feminine sounding roles, but the husband should be.
You talk about like the chauffeur, like the protector, like he's got some good stuff.
The husband should be the cheerleader's number one cheerleader. Mm-hmm. In other words, he'll root for her warmly in the tasks he's delegated to her, and he thanks her tirelessly for her enthusiasm. So he's cheerleading his cheerleader. That's really, really important. Same thing with being a good boss. Gratefulness grows the relationship even more. You got to be her greatest appreciator. Like she's his greatest appreciator. Almost like secretary to boss, but I mean, way sexier and more natural and more, it grows more naturally. And this is the greatest secretary in the world, but so much more than that. After all, she's doing all this stuff in support of him. So in basketball, with pick and roll basketball, the league is moving toward all high pick and roll basketball. We say help the helper. Same thing here. The husband is cheerleader, not in the sense that we like male cheerleaders. That's very gross. We go to Pelicans games and they have 2 male cheerleaders we're hoping drop off. But he cheerleads the cheerleader. That's the sense in which he is. So we can go to confidants. Yeah, I mean, they're kind of each other's confidants in a more mutual way. It's kind of obvious that, you know, the first person that you want to tell is your wife if you're a husband, and the first person you want to tell if you're a husband is your wife. That's more obvious. There's a little more to it than that, but it's really clear when we say that a wife is a counselor in the case of need, that she is going to be the confidant of her husband.
We talk about this later, but one of the greatest keys a woman can do, or one of the greatest things a woman can do to win her husband's just affections and heart, is just constant gratitude. And for men, it's really what we say here on the bottom slide here is just being listening, supportive, and a good advisor. Part of being a really good leader is that you understand who you're leading. And for women, particularly if they get frustrated or overwhelmed or whatever, they want to be able to turn to you for leadership, but also for comfort as well. So it's very important to understand how we're each motivated.
Yeah, so part of being a confidant as a wife is being a sounding board for a guy's fresh ideas. Again, lots of men like just doing this with other men. The first person I go to as a sounding board is Steph. And again, this is sounding, I dare I say, even a little more egalitarian than people would associate with me. She's also a kind of jousting partner. If he requires a conceptual foil, okay, hold on, you play this role. I'm gonna make this pitch. A lot of guys that don't have good wives or good relationships will do this with the boys and just not say anything to their wives. She's a solace for his doubts. That's more traditional. A rejuvenator to his sagging spirits, a stoker of the hope that he harbors in his designs. And this is different from cheerleader. The cheerleader prepossesses the wife as a kind of office when the sun is shining on the married couple, whereas the office of confidant becomes her charge, the wifely charge, when some or many clouds begin to obscure the lighted path to victory. So this is more when it's unsure. And the husband kind of has to be the pliant, listening, sympathetic advisor when he comes home. We cite Jose Maria Escriva, who just says, wives, your husband is your confidant, but don't overburden him when he's getting home from work with tales of domestic woe. Like, no one wants to hear that right away. Let him get a
bite to eat, like sit down a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we are. No one can come between you.
Let's just say one quick, let's just say one quick word on the last one, because it's really fast. Sorry to cut you off. Just the did you just want to say something off the cuff from supporter? Just so we don't leave that hanging out there.
Yeah, so, you know, obviously the husband's one out there facing the world. In a traditional household, the wife is at home. So just constantly understanding that he's out there, he's dealing with the job, he's dealing with leading the household constantly. So just be mindful that he's going to need encouragement. And the way that men feel the most encouraged, from what I've understood, is gratefulness. Absolutely. Whatever your husband is providing to you and how he's providing it to you, whether you live very grandly or you live very moderate and modestly, gratefulness.
Thanks.
Just perfect attention to that. So yeah.
Gratefulness. Thanks. No, I just mean, yeah, you're like the best supporter, but I just don't want to leave a triplet out there where we're like these 3 things and then we just leave it. Yeah, but the supporter is more obvious. I would say really fast, the way men support their wives is, if you're asking, hey, you be my main supporter. Okay, a lot of wives are now saying, I know because I taught high school seniors and college girls too. Like, I really trust my boyfriend, but my dad wants me to be like an independent woman feminist. But I'm going to trust the boyfriend and get married. My dad's going to be mad at me. All the world's going to be mad. It's the helper thing. Once again, your husband has to understand and has to enact in his own husbanding to you. You cashed it all in to support him if you're doing this the right way. So he needs to support supporter. That's right. That's all I wanted to say. Yeah, but I knew off the cuff would be really.
Main thing on this chapter is that no one can come between you. So if you and your spouse become one another's main cheerleaders, confidants, and supporters, then we guarantee that nothing and no one will come between you. But even this much will require some protective action on your part. Now, this is where people get very, very uncomfortable, especially new couples, because they're not established in their families yet. And so they feel like, okay, what boundaries are we supposed to set with people who are consistently overstepping boundaries and kind of trying to micromanage a couple's life? And this could happen even if you've been married 30 years, if there's somebody in your life who is doing this.
Yes.
So many couples avoid setting clear boundaries with their close friends and family members because they believe doing so would be perceived as harsh or confrontational. And of course, we're not suggesting that you're going and you're just picking apart every single person in your family. But if there's somebody that is presenting a problem that's causing division between you and your spouse, that has to be dealt with. That has to be dealt with. So the key is to communicate to that person directly at the very moment the infraction occurs. And we say this in our book, always do these things privately. It doesn't matter, you know, like what the infraction is or where you're at. Just say a very polite, like, hey, can we have a private conversation?
You mean take aside a busybody in the family and be like, hey, butt out.
Yeah,
Privately.
basically, privately let them know I'm under. And for a lot of people, a lot of young couples, they might have these conversations a lot more frequent because everyone, when a new couple has gotten married and the family is understanding what their new roles are.
Yeah.
The father of the bride is understanding he's kind of diminishing and she's her importance and diminishing in importance, so to speak, and the husband is raising in importance. So everyone's kind of figuring out what their new roles are. So this isn't entirely like anybody's out to get you or they're being particularly cruel or anything. But a lot of times couples, when they're first married, neglect these conversations right off the bat by setting boundaries, respectful boundaries, not like, hey, I don't like this, I don't like that. When it really calls for it, when it really causes division between you or somebody's really kind of micromanaging something, you have to deal with it.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, jockeying for position in the first year or two of most marriages, if they do this right from the beginning, or in the next year or two, if you're only now starting to implement these things, even if you've been married 10 years, jockeying for position is not wholly perverted or unnatural. It's gonna be like this for a year or two. It's really important to be willing to go through a year or two like this. Steph writes, setting clear boundaries need not be intimidating. Most often, opportunities to do so present themselves naturally and extemporaneously, especially upon return home from the honeymoon, when the newlyweds present themselves as just another one of the family's patriarchal sub-households among their families. So you just kind of say, here's how we are. You always tell our kids, you know, you treat people how to treat you. You teach people how to treat you.
You're a new kingdom. You're going to set up your boundaries and your borders. And just like any of the other established kingdoms around you, you got to start doing that really early. And respectfully doing that is key. And we say too that most times in most families, I'd like to believe that conversation will happen once. You take somebody aside and you say, listen, this is causing division. I really don't want this to be affecting my marital life. Like, please understand that this is how we are going to do things and please don't repeat behavior. Usually with loving family members, that'll be the end of it. And you can always recur to the conversation if something kind of a little bit flares up. Like, oh, remember the conversation we had? Like, don't do that. However, in some families, if an offending party, if you have like a busybody mom who's constantly like, let's say it's...
Which many of you do.
Which many of you
Not
do.
all of you, but many.
Let's say it's a situation where you're newlywed and your husband's mother is constantly coming to you and be like, you need to tell him da-da-da-da-da. And you're like, no. I'm not a proxy to tell my husband anything that you want him to say. And you've had that conversation with her over and over and over again. And it just keeps coming up and people are not respecting you as a couple, as a married couple. Then there needs to be consequences.
The marital island has sovereign borders. So there has to be consequences to repeat offenders who won't take no for an answer. What are those consequences?
You know, we say it's hard to decipher exactly what specific consequences. You'll have to like think about that within the context of your own family. But we've talked to people, they've written letters. They say, okay, we're not going to be hanging out as much anymore if this behavior is going to continue. Now, if somebody is super obstinate, even after all of this is where a lot of people get very uncomfortable hearing it, but even close family members have to be cut out for a time being. You are allowed to do that. If there's a family member, doesn't matter how close they are to you, if they are actively micromanaging your marriage or trying to cause division with you, that, and they've been warned many, many times, and they've been told, you need to stop this or we're not going to be able to spend time with you. That person needs to be cut out for a time being to reassess their own behavior. Now, if that hiatus lasts a week, phenomenal and great. But sometimes that hiatus lasts a longer time than you're expecting. But your marriage and the sovereignty of your marriage is vital for yourselves to get to heaven, but also for the longevity of your marriage.
Yeah, and for your kids too. People like to say for the kids, it's sometimes the cost of doing business, and that's a prudential decision. But and it should be the nuclear option, but not the nuclear option, which is regarded with such a high standard of review that no one's ever implementing it. There are a lot of busybodies nowadays in families because marriage is in a worse state than it's ever been in all of human history. So this is going to be happening with people reading this book. Like, wow, I didn't realize how important marital island was. I didn't realize how important self-reliance is. Self-reliance, not just being the man, but the man together with his helpmeet. This is new. I haven't heard any of this, which of course, many of you haven't. And I didn't realize how toxic it is to be getting advice from even half-decent advisors outside the couple. It needs to be insulated. Okay, I'm going to tell my family today. A lot of the families are going to be pissed. A lot of them are not going to be friendly to it, and they don't have to be. But they do have to know that you're the ones that hold the key to your kingdom, to marital island. And you're like, look, if you want to keep coming around, hanging out with us, if you want to have a relationship with us and eventually the grandkids, this is how it's going to be. You're not going to run down my wife. She's going to say, you're not going to run down my husband, or you're not going to offer unsolicited advice. Got to be forceful.
And this naturally brings us to the next great confusion that a lot of Catholics in particular have with what does it mean as an adult, because we have a lot of fallen families and fractured families and a lot of dysfunction out there, with honoring your mother and father as an adult.
And Father Chad addressed this today also. A lot of perverted understandings of the fourth commandment, which is pretty straightforward. You have to obey when you're a little kid and you live with them. As an adult, what do you owe to your wellspring? Support in their old age. That Aquinas is pretty clear about that. You do not have to obey them. You do not have to. Well, they said they want to give advice, and me and my husband don't really want to hear it. What do we do?
My mother-in-law is insisting that she helps us pick X, Y, or Z. No, you don't owe that to your parents.
We get this email all the time. That isn't this a fourth commandment issue? No, it is absolutely not. It couldn't be any clearer in the Catholic tradition. The way you honor your mother and your father once you have your own household is they need financial support when they're older. Well, my parents are really rich, like boomers or whatever, and they don't need support. Okay, well then you're sort of off the hook, but you definitely don't have to obey them when you're the king of your own marital island. So don't misapply the fourth commandment. Put it in simple terms.
And the Catechism says this, that you, as an adult child, you owe them material and moral support in their old age and in times of illness, loneliness, and distress. So that's very basic. Like Tim says, yeah, it changes. So as a child, you owe them obedience. You do not owe them obedience when you are an adult, and especially not whenever you've established your own kingdom, so to speak. So remember that when we live according to Christ's rules, he says this in scripture, that it's going to cause division.
In families.
In families, specifically in families. And it's to be expected. And again, like I said, hopefully you only have this conversation once or twice, with people in your family to kind of set the ground rules on what how you're expected to be treated and how you're expecting your spouse to be treated, and it ends there. But Christ even says, do not think that I have come to bring peace upon earth. I've come to bring not peace, but the sword. For I have come to set man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and one's enemies will be those of his household. Whoever loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves a son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. We all know as Christians, as Catholics, that following scripture and God's law in this day and age will get you in it, will garner you enemies. And unfortunately for all of us who are living in traditional households or striving to, those enemies might even come from your family that don't understand why you're living this way, or why would you follow rules? Why are you why are you following all these Catholic rules? A lot of people will not understand that. Okay.
So this is that good faith. We tried to pay forward to the subtitle of the book. We didn't want to just say, hey, we just wrote a book with 9 key lessons that were once taught but are now censored. And then for certain of those 9 lessons, which are slightly less politically incorrect, just leave the title in the lurch, so to speak. We wanted to say very specifically, we wanted to articulate how is each of the 9 lessons really censored now, how and why. And here's the hard truth. True marital independence nowadays, worst situation for marriage and family ever, is censored because many aging baby boomers and others too, Gen Xers and even some very old greatest gen, inside and outside the church, hate the idea of the younger generations moving out of the house, not because they hate the idea of them moving out of the house and providing for their own families. Actually, famously, it's kind of a generational typification that baby boomers are in love with this economic aspect.
You're 18, you're out of here.
Yeah, your kids leaving and cleaving, that's great. But rather, it's politically incorrect because many baby boomers can't stand the idea of being excluded from the decision-making of their economically independent relative. So in other words, they want to have their cake and eat it too. You're 18 when you're out of the house, but hey, I still want my decision to count in my daughter's life, even though her husband's the man of the house. That's just not how it works. And that's what makes this relatively common sense proposition of what it takes to live on marital island, self-reliance. It makes it surprisingly politically incorrect.
And all the other chapters after this are built on this principle.
Yes.
The bond, there's nothing comes between the two of you. Nothing. Nothing ever comes between you or anyone else. Okay, so occasional advice, like we've said, from a trusted source can be quite a blessing. If you are lucky enough to be the offspring of a genuinely trustworthy source, by all means, do avail yourself of that advice when you need it from time to time. Again, don't overuse that. The patriarch of the household has to learn how to be a patriarch of the household at some point. But if there's a decision that's particularly tricky and you need advice, ask people you trust. But most people of this era are not so lucky. And the greater danger far and away for denizens of our age is feeling undue pressure to heed the advice of an unfit family elder who might not give you a loan if you needed it.
Yeah.
That was a Tim line.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. This is kind of typifies the generational, what's become the leitmotif is you're out of the house, get your own money. This is our, we don't really do the primogenitor or the generational sharing anymore. Okay, that's fine. But then we're going to stick to leave and cleave. That makes it even easier to do the leave and cleave. And like, we're going to take our own advice. And this is a religious generation, once again, that's coming up, particularly with the Zoomers. So they want to embrace religion and living the right way.
My generation, our generation, millennials were terrible at that. And we are encouraged to see some of the younger generations coming through are doing a little bit better in this regard. But the bottom line is that it's a boring island without sexual romance, which we're going to get to chapter 2, and fun, which we're going to get to in chapter 3. So as this first chapter is shown, the self-reliance of marriage is supposed to be pleasurable. This is true even if you've already been married for many decades. Romance involves putting the other person before yourself and taking the time to make him feel special via flirtation, compliments, act of kindness. Remember, it's not about you or me, it's about us. That's how you should be looking at things in general. Fights, disagreements, conversations, it's not about me, it's not about you, it's about us. The hard truth is that few Christian authors want to admit it, but as noted above, what this really boils down to is fun and sex shared generously by spouses. Naturally, there's more to marriage than just these, but one must enhance first things first. You always say put first things first and second things second, and you'll get both.
Put first things second and second things first, and you get neither. Yeah,
right.
That's C.S. Lewis. Yeah.
Tending to the improvement of marital sex and fun are easy fixes.
Quick bond glues, we call them. So chapters 2 and 3 coming up in the next 2 weeks. These are the quick bond glues. So quick fixes, easy solves. You can improve 30 to 40% of what's gone wrong in even a really defunct marriage just by tending capaciously to the improvement of marital sex and fun. And that's what we're going to talk about. And then you have to get rid of some other bad habits in addition to enhancing marital sex and fun. But those two quick bond glues will get almost half your problems licked right away.
Again, it's humility to understand what you're doing wrong. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about us. Okay, so at the end of each chapter, we have in the book, and we'll have here for the slides for those of you who don't have the book, conversation starters that you and your spouse can talk about.
The recitals. You should actually, as you go through, say this each one to the other. And like, Steph's going to go through them right now. It seems corny. I always hated the idea of like workbook, workshop, work anything. I hate the idea of workshopping something. They would say this at like teacher meetings. That'd be covering my face. It's not a verb to workshop something. I hate that. But you and your husband, if you're here, you and your wife, this is between you two. It's actually these conversation starters, if taken seriously as recitals, things you actually each recite and give a thoughtful response to, will be greatly remedial. And so we took a lot of time making sure that these conversation starters pertained to the lesson, and we do it for each of the 9 lessons. And
I suggest, we both suggest, like taking the time to do this. Don't just kind of like get through them. Really take some time to look through them, even look through them beforehand and kind of think of your answers beforehand. But I say go on a date and do these things. Sometimes the chapter will be a little bit a conversation you may not want to have in public, but this one you probably will be fine if you go out on a date and have these conversations. But so first question you should be asking each other is, and we want both of you as answering these, is being our own island one of our strengths as a couple? If not, how can we improve? Do either of us depend too much on family or friends, or how can we cut back on such dependence? Are there ways we can improve being each other's best supporter, confidant, and cheerleader?
Those are 3 different things.
Different things.
Be specific in the devil's in the details. Be really specific in your answers. Eyeball these an hour before you go and do the recitals with your husband. So you each can, your husband and wife can each have a kind of pre-thought through answer.
And promise me this, that each of you just be humble and like understand that you each have flaws and things you're doing wrong, and really just investigate, almost like an examination of conscience for the good of your marriage, just what you think needs to be improved. And if your spouse is telling you something you need to improve, have the humility to hear it and know that you guys are both working and striving towards heaven together, and just have a good attitude about it.
Well, the way you have the good attitude is what you said earlier. It's not about you. It's not about me. We're one flesh, so it's about us. That makes it easiest to apologize to this person in the world. It's like Fraser and Niles. They have to take turns apologizing, meaning they don't really get to the juridical matter of who was actually wrong or right because they just alternate. That's because it's not that easy to apologize to your brother because you're not one flesh. But when the truly wrong person says I was wrong, we'll get to this more in chapter 7, but it's just an example of what Steph means about attitude. Between this other person that's part of your flesh, that kind of 2-for-1 flesh thing, you're really not losing. It shouldn't even be your pride, because I'm like, no, we'll benefit by me saying I'm sorry here. We'll benefit by the wrong party saying they're wrong because it's the other half of my flesh anyway. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about us.
And we see the beauty of that in confession, right? We perfect ourselves through an examination of conscience. We're like, okay, I need to stop doing this. I'm doing this too much. It's all part of just perfecting yourself and gaining heaven. And it just takes humility and a little bit of patience and understanding to do that.
None of this means, by the way, that as you go through the recitals at the end of every chapter, we give very specific recitals in chapter 7, how to get out of arguments. People find that really valuable. But here we'd read 3 of the conversation starters from chapter 1. There's a 4th and a 5th. You'll note that as you go through this, husbands will be like, oh, good. This is good. This is a conversation I wanted to have with my wife. I'm so glad that this is in this book. About, roughly half the time it'll be wives that are like, my husband's kind of stoic. I'm glad that this book has him talking about that particular question. So you'll notice you're both going to end up winning because we did the sometimes awkward recitals for you to get you talking. The 4th question, are decisions truly our own? That's kind of a yes or no. Are there any the fifth question here in the conversation one recitals is really important. Maybe the most important one of all these five. Are any family members currently needing admonitions against interfering in our lives? Do they need to, be exercise the nuclear option there again? We'll see. But
and then I say there in parentheses that if that's the case where somebody needs to be admonished, it's something if it's a woman and these are happening, you can take them aside as a woman and tell the family, I'm like, stop that. But if more severe consequences and boundaries need to be shared, the husband needs to do that.
Right.
It doesn't matter what side of the family it is, the husband needs to have that conversation.